Tonight, the world is reacting with shock, concern, and urgent diplomacy after the United States and Israel carried out major military strikes across Iran. From Washington to Moscow, Beijing to Brussels, governments are warning that the situation could escalate into a much larger regional crisis. As military tensions rise and retaliation becomes a growing possibility, global leaders are scrambling to respond to what could become one of the most dangerous geopolitical confrontations in years. The strikes targeted several locations across Iran, including military bases, missile facilities, and strategic infrastructure believed to be connected to Iran's defense capabilities. According to officials involved in the operation, the strikes were aimed at weakening Iran's ability to launch further attacks and limiting the country's military capacity in the region. Explosions were reported in multiple areas, and satellite imagery has since revealed significant damage at several sites. Iranian authorities quickly condemned the attacks and warned that the country would respond. Government officials described the strikes as an act of aggression and vowed that Iran would defend its sovereignty. Iranian military leaders said their forces remain on high alert and are prepared to respond if further attacks occur. Within hours of the strikes, international reactions began pouring in from governments around the world. The conflict has immediately become the center of global diplomatic discussions, with many leaders expressing concern that the situation could spiral out of control. At the United Nations, an emergency meeting of the Security Council was convened as diplomats gathered to discuss the rapidly developing crisis. Representatives from multiple countries called for calm and warned that further military escalation could threaten global stability. The Secretary General urged all parties involved to exercise restraint and emphasized the importance of returning to diplomatic solutions. The United Nations leadership also expressed concern about the humanitarian consequences of continued fighting. In conflicts involving major military operations, civilians often face the greatest risks, and international organizations are already preparing for the possibility of humanitarian assistance if the situation worsens. Across Europe, the response was cautious but deeply concerned. Leaders from several European countries issued statements urging restraint and calling for immediate efforts to reduce tensions. The European Union emphasized that diplomacy remains the best path forward and warned that military escalation could destabilize an already fragile region. European officials also highlighted the potential economic consequences of a prolonged conflict. The Middle East plays a crucial role in global energy markets, and disruptions to oil production or transportation routes could have far-reaching effects on the global economy. In Moscow, Russia strongly criticized the military strikes and warned that such actions could increase instability across the region. Russian officials called for immediate diplomatic negotiations and argued that military force would only make the situation more dangerous. Russia has long maintained strategic interests in the Middle East, and officials there warned that continued escalation could lead to unpredictable consequences. They emphasized that the international community should focus on dialogue rather than confrontation. China also voiced concern about the escalating tensions. Chinese officials urged all sides to avoid further military actions and instead pursue diplomatic discussions aimed at reducing tensions. Beijing warned that the conflict could threaten global stability if it continues to escalate and called for international cooperation to prevent the situation from worsening. Across the Middle East itself, reactions have been mixed but cautious. Many governments in the region are closely monitoring developments and evaluating how the conflict might affect their own security. Several countries have increased their military readiness and activated air defense systems in response to the possibility of retaliatory strikes. Regional leaders are particularly concerned that the conflict could spread beyond Iran's borders. The Middle East has experienced several major conflicts in recent decades, and many governments are determined to avoid a wider war that could destabilize the region. Diplomatic channels across the region are now working intensively as governments attempt to reduce tensions and prevent the crisis from expanding. Behind the scenes, officials from multiple countries are engaging in discussions aimed at encouraging restraint from all sides. Meanwhile, humanitarian organizations are raising alarms about the potential impact of the strikes on civilians. Emergency responders in affected areas have been working to assist those injured in the attacks and to assess damage to infrastructure. Hospitals and emergency services have reportedly been placed under significant pressure as they respond to the situation. Aid groups warn that if the conflict continues, thousands of civilians could be displaced as people attempt to move away from areas that may become targets of further military action. Humanitarian agencies are already preparing contingency plans in case the crisis escalates further. There are also growing concerns about the safety of critical infrastructure. Power stations, transportation networks, and communication systems could all be affected if the conflict intensifies. Damage to such infrastructure can significantly complicate humanitarian efforts and make recovery more difficult for affected communities. In the Gulf region, governments are taking additional precautions as tensions rise. Some countries have strengthened security around key facilities and military bases, while closely monitoring the possibility of missile or drone attacks. The presence of international military forces in the region adds another layer of complexity to the situation. Several countries maintain military bases in the Middle East, and any escalation could potentially affect these forces as well. At the same time, the crisis is sending shockwaves through global financial markets. Energy prices have been particularly sensitive to developments in the region. Oil prices have fluctuated sharply as investors react to concerns that the conflict could disrupt supply routes or damage production facilities. Economists warn that prolonged instability in the Middle East could affect global trade and economic growth. Energy supplies from the region play a crucial role in the global economy, and disruptions can have ripple effects across multiple industries. Shipping routes in nearby waters are also being closely monitored. The region contains some of the most important maritime trade routes in the world, and any threats to shipping could have significant consequences for international commerce. Security analysts say the situation remains highly predictable. Military operations, political decisions, and diplomatic negotiations are all unfolding simultaneously, making it difficult to determine how the conflict may develop in the coming days. For now, many governments are focusing on diplomacy as the most effective way to prevent the situation from escalating further. Diplomacy efforts often intensify during moments of crisis, and multiple international actors are now working behind the scenes to encourage dialogue. Some analysts believe that global pressure could eventually push the parties involved towards negotiations. However, others warn that tensions remain extremely high and that even a single miscalculation could trigger further escalation. Public reactions around the world have also been significant. Protests, political debates, and public discussions have emerged in several countries as people express their opinions about the strikes and their potential consequences. International media outlets are closely covering the situation, providing updates as new information becomes available. The rapidly evolving nature of the crisis means that developments are occurring almost constantly, making it one of the most closely watched geopolitical events in the world right now. Military experts note that modern conflicts often involve complex strategies that extend beyond traditional battlefield operations. Cybersecurity threats, intelligence activities, and economic measures can all play a role in shaping the outcome of geopolitical confrontations. Because of this complexity, the situation remains fluid and difficult to predict. Governments around the world are carefully assessing their positions and considering how best to respond as the crisis unfolds. Ultimately, the central question facing the international community is whether diplomacy can succeed in preventing a larger conflict. History has shown that moments of extreme tension can sometimes lead to breakthroughs in negotiations, but they can also lead to further escalation if efforts to de-escalate fail. For millions of people around the world, the developments in the Middle East are being followed with a mixture of concern and uncertainty. The region has long been a focal point of global politics, and events there often have consequences far beyond its borders. As leaders continue to discuss possible solutions and military forces remain on high alert, the coming days will likely prove critical in determining the direction of the crisis. For now, the world is watching closely as diplomacy, military strategy, and international politics intersect in one of the most significant global confrontations in recent years. the situation remains highly dynamic, and new developments could emerge at any moment. Governments, analysts, and citizens alike are closely monitoring events as they unfold. Whether this crisis moves towards de-escalation or further conflict will depend on decisions made by leaders in the coming days and weeks. Until then, the world continues to watch.